Welcome back to another episode of Fortitude. We are honored to have a Naval Aviator, Lucky Riley, with us today. And man, thank you so much for coming on. Now, Lucky is going to be with us. He is co-authored Unwavered with Randy Beaujolais, who we just had on. And so we're not going to cover a whole lot about the book. These individual interviews are more to kind of give everybody, to let them know who you are and give a little background before we get into the nuts and bolts of the book and how you and Randy met and all that good stuff. And but we are delighted. So Lucky is a Naval Aviator, Top Gun to his name, and he's going to explain a little bit more to that to us, because when we all hear Top Gun, for a while we think about Mavericks, but I'm sure, you see this smile? And I will tell you this, one thing that I have heard from aviators is that they were tickled to death about is in Maverick, when they went to fire up the Tomcat, they say they got it right.
Yeah, they did.
That they got it right. So,
they did. I know a lot of, matter of fact, I know all the guys who consulted on the Tomcat portion of that. A lot of guys that I met throughout my career and were trained by and flew with, and they did a really good job making that realistic as it can be, an operational Tomcat, which is kind of a fantasy, but the start sequence and everything they had to go through, it was pretty funny. It was well done.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, man, let's just get right into this. What was your childhood like?
Childhood was the American dream. I mean, it was, I hate to use the term middle class, but I grew up, comfortable, happy. I had great parents, 2 older sisters, played a lot of sports, was involved in a lot of activities, everything from Boy Scouts to, like I say, different sports. But yeah, it unremarkable, I guess, as far as anything interesting happened in my life. But no, it was a really good upbringing. I was very well taken care of and loved by my family, and probably led to a lot of things I wound up doing.
So where were you raised? Where did you?
Out Conroe, Texas.
So you're home.
I'm a local. Yeah, I was born here. I was raised here. Went to Conroe High School, all that kind of stuff. So wound up going to Texas A&M. So I was in this area for the majority of my early years until I went off into the Navy.
So when you went into the Navy, when you went to A&M, at what point did the Navy and becoming a pilot in the Navy, how did all that?
Well, it's pretty simple. My dad was a Naval Aviator. He was
really?
Yeah, he flew F-8s in Vietnam. Was up on Yankee Station.
You mentioned that in the book, I remember.
Right. So it was obviously a heavy influence. And he was out. He was already an airline pilot by the time I was born. So probably the infrequency of the information I got about his career and stuff probably made me more motivated to do it. And it was really unbeknownst to him. He said the day I actually told him that I wanted to do it when I was in college was a surprise to him. He said I didn't show much interest going through life about it, but I was actually absorbing it like a sponge. So I think my dad took me to 3 movies in my life where he actually went to the movie theater. One of them was Top Gun. And he knew a lot about the movie. He knew some of the guys who had done the flying. And he took me to that movie when I was a kid. And then shortly thereafter, he had a reunion out in Miramar. And the whole family went out there. And I got to see the base and the planes. And I think that's really where the hook got set. And I started thinking about it.
A little bit of pun intended here.
Totally pun intended. I like the hook set, but yes. So yeah, and it built from there. And there's a story, I believe it's in the book, about my dad testing me and getting me a private pilot's license, and then tested by another pilot to go up and do aerobatic stuff. So yeah, it's slowly built over time. I kind of knew it in the back of my head that I wanted to do that. I wanted to be like him. And it turned out that I just loved it. I loved the flying, and I loved everything about it. So yeah, it was a pretty clear path. I know a lot of people struggle trying to find their path and where they're going, but I knew from a pretty early age, and it just built and built and built.
So my sister-in-law, my wife's sister, we graduated together in high school. And I tell everybody, I've never met anyone in my life that was as focused on what they wanted to do when they were, she knew in high school what she wanted to do, And come hell or high water, there wasn't nothing stopping her or nobody.
Yep.
And now she's a prosthodontist, a maxillofacial surgeon.
Yeah.
And so to hear you say that does not surprise me. You're the second person I've ever met that actually says that went through it, knew it at a very young age what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
So growing up, your dad was a big influencer.
Big, yeah.
So that's all.
Yeah.
We need father influencers
Right.
in this world today. God bless your dad, man. My dad was too. My dad, I'm in West Virginia, Southern West Virginia, Coalfields, born and raised.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I would go sometimes weeks and never see, or a week wouldn't see my dad, because he got up and went to, when he got home from work, I was outside. So he was in the bed by the time I got
Right.
home.
Yeah.
And then he left so early, he was gone whenever I got up to go to school. So I'd see him on Saturday, or if he didn't work Saturday, I saw him Saturday night or Sunday. And that was about
And my
it.
dad, he was gone a lot. He traveled a lot, obviously being an airline pilot.
Right.
But a lot of people would ask me that, especially at a younger age. Do you not like that your dad's always gone? And I was like, no, actually, when he was home, he was home. There was no work that he brought home with him. So I had some affluent friends who had doctors and lawyer fathers and stuff like that, and they always worked. They're always in the office. But when my dad came home, he'd take that flight kit, set it by the back door when he walked in, and it was done. He picked it back up on his way out. He was dad when he was home, so he was coaching my baseball teams, my soccer teams. He was at all the events. So
Wow.
he would work his schedule around his children's biggest events for that month, and he was always there. He was there for the important stuff, and I actually really liked it because it was a cool job, and when he was home, he wasn't working, so I liked it.
So you mentioned sports. What sports did you play in school?
In school, by the time I got to high school, I thought I was going to be a basketball player, which you can tell by looking at me, that didn't go well. But I played baseball. I played baseball most of my life. That's my love. I still love baseball. Me and my sons play baseball. We watch professional baseball all the time, so yes. Big baseball player. I had delusions of grandeur of playing in school, and when I went off to Texas A&M, they were like #1 in the country that year, and I tried to walk on. Yeah, I couldn't hit anything. I couldn't anything but a changeup, and sitting on a changeup's no way to go through life. So
Chad's was football.
Yeah.
We get off this podcast, I like to exchange stories because he had a lot of the same
Yeah.
experience. So your dad influenced you for the military. So when you leave A&M, pick us up about how you transitioned into the Navy and how that came about.
yeah, it was an interesting process, knowing, because I knew what I wanted to do. A lot of guys that were in the Corps Cadets at the time, which I was one of the guys wearing the boots with the shaved head and the uniforms. They all just wanted to be in the military, so they're under ROTC contracts and things like that, and they're just happy to get wherever the military sends them. Well, I didn't. You have the option at A&M to not be ROTC. You can do what's called drill and ceremonies, which is just you're in the Corps just to be in it. So I opted for that because I didn't want to get assigned surface warfare, submarine warfare, things that I didn't want to be involved in. I wanted to be a pilot. So I went for an officer candidate school contract, even though I had done essentially 4 years of ROTC, because I wanted the guaranteed pilot slot. And to the point where my first offer, when I put in my first package, was to be an NFO, a naval flight officer, to be a backseater, which I don't have anything negative to say about backseaters, but I wanted to fly, so I turned it down eventually until they gave me what I wanted. So when I left A&M, I went right into officer candidate school instead of being commissioned and going through flight training or something like that, which I think in some ways helped me out a lot. Being able to go get absorbed through the Navy through that type of training, through that type of boot camp style training, was a little bit easier for me than some of the guys that come right out of college and go into flight training. They're in for kind of a rude awakening sometimes.
Was there a challenge or competition between you coming from A&M and going through officer candidate school and then going through the Naval Academy? Was there pushback there? Was there competition? How did that?
My father was worried about that quite a bit. He called them the ring knockers, right? The academy guys. And
Yeah.
It's not really that way anymore. At least when I started going through, I was expecting that. I was expecting there to be a little bit of a hierarchy of the academy guys and the regular university guys, but it really didn't exist. And I think that's one of the things I really enjoyed about being in naval aviation, and probably Randy will say the same thing about SEALs, is it's a merit base, it's a meritocracy. You do as you're viewed the way you perform. So it was kind of in my hands. I never really ran into any of that politics. There were cliques in the beginning, right? So when you get to officer camp school or pre-flight, the academy guys hang out together. Certain guys hang out in different groups, the OCS guys, or OTC guys. But once we get into the real training and guys start flying airplanes and you see who's good at what and who isn't good at what, then the new kind of cliques form and you develop different friendships. But I never really ran into the politics of specifically the academy. Obviously there's a lot of politics in the military, but
Right.
not along that lines. It was transparent to me.
That's good to know, because it's competition can create or it does promote greatness, I mean, or to bring people. We're in such this woke thing where everybody's equal. That's not it. That's not how this thing works.
Trying to put me on the soapbox?
So, oh my God, dude, listen, we need to get Randy in here. We can go for a while,
yeah,
but
it'll be
it
bad,
may
yeah.
be the end of your all's business. But when you, so I asked Randy what it was like the first time when he got the buzz and went to the grinder.
Mm-hmm.
For you, what was it like for that old crap moment when you took your first real steps up the ladder and sat in the cockpit and you're sitting there like, oh my God, this is happening. What
Yeah.
was that like?
Oh, I know exactly. Yeah, I know exactly when that happened. It was, it takes about 2 years to get to your fleet aircraft. You get to the training squad or the RAG. To say, for me, it was flying the Tomcat. But so I'd already flown T-34, T-45. I'd flown a bunch of airplanes, but that moment never really settled in for me until I was actually taxiing in a Tomcat. So here I am, the plane I had seen when I was a kid out at Miramar, the plane I'd seen on the movie and everything, and I'm actually in that thing taxiing. And you got the rear view mirrors that you adjust, and I happened to look up at the mirrors, and this was my first flight in a Tomcat, not in a simulator, and I could see the plane behind me and the tails and everything, and it set in just like that. It was like, oh my God, I'm in a Tomcat. This is like really cool. And I had another similar moment like that it was actually back in the T-45 where I was taking my first catapult shot in training where you do your qualifications, and I turned the mirrors on myself, because there's no need for them in a carrier environment. So I literally had taxied up to the catapult and they were hooking me up, and I turned the mirrors where I could see me with the mask and everything. It was like this disconnect of how would I ever explain this to my high school friends, my college friends? Like they don't understand. Like to this day, they still think I was in the Air Force, right? I mean, you fly airplanes in the military and the Air Force, so it's hard to. Those were the two moments where I'm like, okay, I'm actually out here really doing it, and it was a cool moment, just like you would think.
I can only imagine. Now, my wife's grandfather, his biggest stints were on carriers. Mm-hmm. I was never stationed on a carrier. I was on it, like I was telling you, I was on the Shasta on the West Coast. The ammunition supply ship was my first boat. Then I deployed with Randy on the Hermitage. Mm-hmm. I was on the Hunley out of Holy Loch, Scotland for 2 years on a subtender. But I can't imagine anything that I done other than the first time I was put over the side of the ship, mm-hmm. with Randy's platoon. Like, this is it. There were when you got the LSOs out there, and giving you your signals, mm-hmm. and for the first time you feel being catapulted off the front of that carrier. I mean, is it?
I'll tell you a story.
I just can't imagine. So what was it like for the first time?
I'll tell you a story because I have told the story. I don't remember if I don't think it's in the book, but this was my life's ambition. And I don't mean just being a naval aviator and having a career. My life's goal was to land on an aircraft carrier one time. Just do it once. And I did tell the story about me overhearing my father and his airline friends, and what drove me to want to be a naval aviator specifically. And it was like, I have to land on a carrier one time. And
because your dad questioned you about that, didn't he? Are you
did.
sure you want to do this?
Yeah, he had an Air National Guard spot lined up
Right.
for me, which I would have gone directly from college into an F-16,
Yeah.
and I said no, right? So that's the follow-on to the story. To me, I had to trap. I'd do it one time. I didn't care if it was so bad and so dangerous that they tell me to shut off my engines and get out, I'm done. I had to do it once. So that leads up to my very first experience, because they had put us in simulators, really good visual simulators of actually landing on a carrier and seeing what the pattern looks like and approaching the ball for the first time. So we get led into what's the overhead of the break with an instructor, and I'm -2, and my roommate is -3. And we come in, and the instructor breaks to show us the interval where to go, and he leaves the pattern, and then it's up to me. I'm first down in our little group. And I can't tell you one thing about those 10 to 12 seconds of landing the ball. I don't remember it. I can tell you about thousands of other passes, but I can't tell you that one pass. And I remember I trapped when I hit, and I looked to the right, which you have to think about that to understand how silly that is. There's nothing to the right. Everything's to the left. There's nothing but water over there. And your director and everybody's trying to get your attention to put your hook up and get out of there. And I know this, but I was so scrambled in the head that when I touched down, I looked over to the right, I'm looking at water. And they had to get my attention on the radio, and I turned over, and they're all yelling and jumping down and trying to get me out of the way because my roommate's coming down. And he got waved off because I was still in the LA. So he had to go around on his first trap and come and do it again. So, but that was it for me. I was like, I did it. Life goal at that point. And I think I did really well on my qualifications because, and I know that's the reason why. Because after that, I was just relaxed. It was like, man, I finally did it, but I still had to go do all my different traps, and I qualified pretty easy because I was just in the zone at that point. I was happy as a clam. But yeah, you go over to the cat shot, and that's a different experience, you know, getting run up to about 170 miles an hour in a couple seconds, and you know, it's like a baseball bat in the back of your head. Funny side stories, you know, there's guys will say, oh, I scream like a girl. You know, they'll say stuff like that. If you hear guys, they'll key the mic sometimes and then grunt or whatever. Later on in my career, when I was a senior officer, we had a Reuters news crew come on the carrier while we were on deployment, and they wanted to interview everybody. And of course, the senior guys don't do that. We push it on the nuggets. The new guys got to do that. So we had one new guy, and they asked him that question. They said, what's it like on a catapult shot? And he said, oh, a lot of people say you scream like a girl, and I wasn't like that. So then they grabbed the next kid. He had just walked in, and they said, what was it like your first catapult shot? And he said, I scream like a girl. So his call sign was Slag. That's screams like a girl. So that kid, to this day, his call sign is Slag. So just a funny story.
We're going to get into some of that here in a minute.
Okay, I figured you would.
Yeah, we're going to get, because I listen, I got a, being a Navy guy, man, my favorite part of all the Top Gun movies is it's flight deck.
Yeah.
Watching all that, because
it's amazing.
Well, when I was on the Shasta, I always wanted to be an LSE.
Mm-hmm.
For everybody knows, it's LSO is landing signalman officer. The LSE is landing signalman enlisted, and then you have shooters you talk about. And I'm not going to give it all up about the book, but Lucky goes into a lot of that about what each one does. And I didn't know that the shooters were actually pilots. Mm-hmm. So that's new to me, because I've never, like I said, never been on a carrier. I was on the firefighting crew. I was inside the hangar bay making, waiting if something happened. But that was my job. I wore the red vest, every color of vest, and that you see on that flight deck means something. And there's YouTube videos out there if you want to go watch them. And they're all very, very important. It's a well-oiled machine.
It's an amazing environment.
It's the most.
And it's kids, right? It's 19-year-old kids, and one of the most dangerous environments known to man. It really is. I know it's hyperbole, but it's really dangerous up there.
It's known as the most dangerous 2 acres in the world, right?
Right. Yeah. It's spinning props, spinning rotor blades, jet intakes, jet blast. Nighttime, there's no lights. Just that little halogen light. It's it's not a fun place to be if you don't know what you're doing.
And there's pictures out there of guys getting sucked up and thrown out of.
Yeah, guys have died in all kinds of horrible ways on that flight deck.
Yeah, yeah, it's not pretty by any stretch of the
And I
imagination.
was a landing signal officer too, by the way. I don't know if you knew that or not.
No, I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
I was an LSO.
But I knew you talked a little bit about that, but I didn't know if you were. I thought you talked more about the shooters.
The shooters they're on disassociated sea tours, so they're actually attached to the ship. They're under the ship
Oh,
command.
so the
they're
shooter
not
is.
with the air wing.
Okay.
But there are guys who have to go do their disassociated away from the community and go do a sea tour. That's who those guys are. So they go out there for an entire tour, attached to ship, and they're out there just to run the cats.
All right, so all you guys are big Top Gun movie fan. Make sure you get this podcast out there to all your friends so that we can clear up everything that's going on in this movie, so that we're all very clear.
Oh man.
I mean, I'm a sailor, and I'm learning stuff here like crazy. What would you say? Oh, I'm gonna ask you this. So my wife and I lived in Lynn Haven,
Okay.
Virginia Beach. You know where Lynn Haven
I know
Mall is.
exactly where it is. Yep.
So when we bought our house right down from Lynn Haven Boulevard, we had to sign the paper about air noise.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was 24/7. You guys were circling. Were you all just doing touch and goes, or did they just do touch and goes? What are
Yeah,
they?
I mean that's our normal landing pattern. You know, that's a big story. I know if you've heard the part of me telling the 9/11 story where there was a special that was on that night. That was it was a two-part series. It was September 10th and 11th, and it was 2020, or it was one of those investigative reporting shows. And the second night was all about Oceana and the noise abatement. And I don't know if you remember back then, there was a group called Cajun, Concerned Citizens Against Jet Noise. That was a thing right before 9/11, right? They were talking about
that was. I was there early. You got to remember, I was there in '88, so it was.
Yeah, so I mean, they were complaining about the noise, and you think about it. You know, the Navy set up that air station when it was all swampland out. There was nothing out there. Virginia Beach was a resort thing out on the beach, and then all of a sudden it grows and encroached. You know, the civilian housing encroached on the airfield. And
It was there first.
to the point where they put that mall right under our 180 position, which is where every single airplane starts his turn to the base leg, and that's when they're adding power because they're sinking.
Oh, you can. Oh, yeah. Well, you're gearing up, and I mean, you can hear it.
We were waiting. I mean, we knew someday somebody was going to buy one right there and go right in the mall. I mean, I was just like, it's going to happen at some point. I can't believe they built that thing right there. But yeah, we used the mall as a physical checkpoint. You'd look down and go, yep, over the
I
mall.
loved it. I sat out there and drank coffee or drank a beer. You know, whenever I drank, I'd sit out there and I loved watching. I mean, I just sat there for hours.
Not everybody loved it. And that was a funny side story to 9/11 because when I did launch that day and came back, the mood of Virginia Beach had changed quite a bit. Right, we were received like heroes. You know, we weren't allowed to wear our flight suits in town. We had to be like in a working uniform. We had to be in our khakis or better because they didn't want us walking around in our flame retardant pajamas looking bad, you know. So, but after that, you know, people would see and they come up and shake your hand and all that kind of stuff. And it was an interesting contrast before and
things
after
changed.
9/11, how things changed. And then how quickly they went back.
Yeah, we're back there already.
Yeah.
How quickly we
Yeah,
forget.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, we. Out of all your training, being a pilot, what would you say if it was in phases, sort of like Randy had to go through phases of buds?
Sure.
What would you say was probably your most difficult phase, or was there ever any doubt? I mean, did you ever get to a point where you're like, man, is this really me? Or I mean, if you never hit that, that's cool. But if there was one thing that kind of stumped you a little bit, or you were like,
yeah. Well, we break it up into we have basic, intermediate, advanced, and you're basically changing airplanes between each one. So, intermediate for me, I got off to a really rough start in that because that was the transition to jets. So you go from the T-34 prop airplane to, at the time, it was a T-2, which is an ancient old jet. My dad flew the T-2 in the 60s, right? So we go up there. I'd gone from Corpus Christi up to Meridian to fly the T-2 and go to intermediate. And you start off with like these instrument phases where you're under the hood and you're just looking at the instruments, as you know, your pilot. And the speed at which it was happening, intercepting radials and all these things. And then on top of that, I had this instructor. It was that instructor. We had on wings, right? So you were given an instructor. It's a civilian guy. It's a guy who's retired military, and he's a simulator instructor. And I had that guy. I had the yeller. A guy was screaming at me and telling me how bad I was and how I needed to leave. You know, it's a funny story because down the road, when I had gone through all that, and I hung out with him later in the later phases, he was really a great guy. But he was on my case. And there were moments where I was like, man, maybe he's right. Maybe I'm not good enough to do this. And my career was kind of saved because the C2 started crashing. Like, they didn't know what was going on. They dropped like 3 of them within 6 months, I think. And it was these really wild, uncontrollable surface movements that were crashing these things. So they put us on ice for like 8 or 9 months. And in that process, they started taking the classes who had just started and sending them down to Kingsville to go get in the T45 instead of the T2. And I wound up being one of those guys and basically started all over. I was a couple phases in, maybe 2 or 3 months into my training, and I got to go start over. And I think, looking back on it, it really saved me, because by that time I had it down. I had the speed down and everything, and Kingsville was a way better experience for me at that time. But yeah, the intermediate phase, when you jump to jets, it's really difficult for most guys, but it was eating me. I'm not sure how I would have finished if I would have stayed there, but I did much better going down to T45 in Kingsville.
So it was your old version of getting rolled.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was a good thing. I mean, a lot of it's the same way. I'm sure that a lot of, I mean, Randy didn't get rolled, but you know, I've read a lot of books and listened to a lot of podcasts, these guys, and they'll say being rolled's probably what saved them, and they were very grateful for it.
Yeah. It was kind of a pseudo roll, but it was just like hitting the reset button for me, and I got to kind of do it again, which was great.
But you know, the thing that we as civilians, or now I'm a civilian, but the people need to understand who aren't naval aviators, who aren't fighter pilots, people who do not land or take off from aircraft carriers, have to understand that you didn't just go to school and then, hey man, go land on this thing. I mean, the number of touch and goes that you all have to do, like we're talking about Lynn Haven. Do you all have if you're allowed to talk about it, if you're not, we'll cut it out. But do you all practice catapulting and that sort of thing on land before you go to the carrier, or is there a way that you all?
The catapult, no. The catapult's just
you can't simulate that because it just
a lot of pictures, videos, procedures you learn, and how to get hooked up in it, but there's no practicing getting shot off that thing.
So when you all come in, do you all practice with your tail hooks?
But we do that.
You do
not
that.
with the hooks down, but the landing aid. Every naval air station has the ball, which is the landing aid that we use to land an aircraft carrier. So if you ever, we make fun of it a lot. You ever watch at an Air Force base and guys come in and they flare and they try to squeak it and make it nice and smooth. Watch the Navy land. They're smacking those airplanes right into the deck. And you know, left of center line, they'll draw a box. There's an aircraft carrier, like the same painting of an aircraft carrier landing area on the left side of every, and then the landing aid's set up for you to hit it. So every time we're landing at the field, we're practicing landing on a carrier. Now there's all kinds of differences, but you're practicing using the landing aid, you're practicing the lineup like you would on an aircraft carrier. So we're not landing on center line, we're not squeaking it, we're literally crashing airplanes right into the deck on a normal airfield.
Which is violent, and this is in the book as well.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see where I'm at here. So in your book, you talked about back surgery, and all you have to do is even watch Top Gun to see how violent the takeoff and landings are. Yeah. And talk about how that abuse on your body finally took a toll.
Yeah, it was the Tomcat, if you can imagine, you know, was designed or conceived in the 40s, you know, drawn out in the 50s, and they start bumping them off the line late 60s and early 70s. So they're really old aircraft. I've got an aircraft that were, you know, the nameplate on the side under the canopy rail was older than me. So the point being that the ergonomics of that thing were not integrated in the design like modern aircraft. So, you know, I flew the F-16 later in my career, and that thing reclines back, and the controls are on the side, so you're in a really good position in your body and your back is straight. But, you know, that old Tomcat, big cockpit, huge cockpit. So to get the right views through the canopy, you got to lean forward, and It had the jail bars on the front glass. So a lot of times, if you think about you're trying to pull and gun somebody in front of you, you're hunched over and you're pulling heavy G's, so it's really hard on guys' backs. It was so bad that they actually set up a back shop at NAS Oceana. There were chiropractors and stuff that were on the base for the pilots, and we had free access to go in and get adjusted. That's how many guys' backs were ruined flying the Tomcat, where, like I said, nowadays all the airplanes are designed for the body. So we were taught from very early on, even back in the T-45s, that when you're in a dogfight and you're pulling heavy G's, body position's a big deal. Where you put your body, where your head and your neck are before you apply the G's. So, you know, if an airplane goes by, you got to turn, get set, and then pull. Otherwise, your body's going to be out of position. It's going to crumple you like an aluminum can. So I know the very first time it happened, and it was during that time in T-45s. I just whipped my head around instead of turning my body, and I put on a pull, and my head snapped forward, and I could feel a shot down my back. So that's where it started, and that was back in the training command. But then with the Tomcat and the really bad positions you get in, it just started getting worse and worse and worse, to the point when it was actually late in my career flying the Super Hornet. When I was a lieutenant commander, I had hurt my back, and then actually the next morning when I woke up and it was all stiff, I sneezed and my back, like somebody stabbed me. So I went through blew out a disc, and I went through all the boring medical stuff, but I had like 4 surgeries to try to correct that. And wound up going back flying after that, actually.
Yeah, you talk about it in your book about what it was like the first time back after surgery. And again, get the book. You won't be disappointed. I'm honored to sit here and talk to a Top Gun pilot. Tell us about your experience.
The Top Gun, the school itself, it's really, it's something you think about from the time you become a fighter pilot, and you know that that's on the table at some point in your career to be able to get to go. So I got to go. There's different schools within Top Gun. So I went to an adversary course. So I was Top Gun adversary. I like to tag it that way. So if you look at I have a Top Gun patch, and if you look at mine, there's a little white banner underneath that says adversary. So I was trained in foreign tactics and how to present foreign tactics to our what we would call blue players, so they can practice their tactics. It's just a neat experience. From the time you walk in there, every class that's ever been in there, their pictures are on the wall, going all the way back to the original class. You can go back and see your mentors and their classes and stuff like that. So it's just, historically, it's a neat thing. The class itself is really tough. I think probably the disconnect for most civilians and the actual pilots that go is what it's really about. We call it briefing school as kind of a joke, as kind of an offhanded remark, because it's more about your knowledge of the tactics and being able to teach it. So the real learning or training to guys getting a patch is their ability to know all the concepts, to be able to teach them. So our briefs, our debriefs, specifically our debriefs, are what really gets you through the program and get you the patch so you can go back. Because the concept of the school is to become an instructor. It's an instructor training course. You're a tactics instructor for your airplane. So you're expected to go back to the fleet in some form or fashion and instruct high-level air-to-air tactics. It's mostly air-to-air tactics. So really great experience. I love the fact that I got to do it. It was kind of an ego check to really just put that little mark in the box. But it's one of those things, as you know, you go to different places in your life and your career, and it's something, you finally get to do something you always wanted to do, and you wonder whether you belong, and you go through those phases, and then you get to the point like, I'm as good or maybe better in some cases than a lot of these guys. So I was also in a unique position that because I came as an adversary, and I was in an adversary squadron. So I played bad guy as one of my tours for 2 years. We flew these cool little Hornets with camouflage paint jobs, and we played professional bad guy. So that squadron, which was a bunch of retired guys flying in the airlines and stuff, and I was one of the few active duty guys there, took a lot of pride in our ability to dogfight one-on-one. So they wouldn't send you until you were not just good enough to pass the course, but you were good enough to go beat the instructors. It was almost a kind of a challenge from the guys at that squadron to go, you need to go out there and beat up some of the instructors when you're going through your syllabus BFM. So we went through at a really high level. We were ready to go for what we did. So I enjoyed the course because it was not as in-depth as some of the the fleet guys who were doing all the blue tactics, and I got to dogfight, which I love to do, and I was good at that point.
So there's one I want to talk about that's in the book. We're not going to talk about it now.
Okay.
I'm going to tease it. Lucky gets challenged on board a carrier by a bully, and we're going to talk a lot about mindset.
Yeah.
And mental toughness. When we come together as a group, get back together with Randy as a group, so make sure you check that out. And it's that I love that in the book.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, I learned a lot about that. I was like, that's exactly how I could see that happening.
So I've actually got a question. If I'm going to pitch in for the back row, we don't hear much about dogfighting
Right.
in the modern theater of war. What are your thoughts about that? Is that happening and we just don't hear about it, or are we continuing to train for something with the knowledge that should we get into a global escalated conflict again, that dogfighting is going to
That you can talk about.
Right. It'll be limited in scope, but the naval aviation and just aerial combat in general goes through these strange cycles ever since Vietnam. Like even the lead up to Vietnam was, there's no need for that anymore. It's all, the weapons have outpaced the visual arena. So we can shoot certain weapons at long range and never even see our opponents. So why do we need to train to that? And that was literally the classic F-4. The F-4 was designed to be a long range radar interceptor, shoot missiles at a distance and never even come to emerge. But then Vietnam happened, and then guys were in aerial combat, guys get in unseen, and there's a need to turn with your opponent. Hence, Top Gun is born out of that, right? We all know from the movie the famous statistics. And that cycle repeats itself, and the weapons get greater, more capability. There's some really cool stuff out there that we got to use, and they're still being developed. But there's always a need to turn. You know, I wish I could cite some of the operations that prove this, but you know, a lot of really advanced aircraft in another country went and did a drill with a underdeveloped country, and the underdeveloped country was getting to emerge like 100 out of 104 times with all these advanced aircraft avionics and radars and stuff. So there will always be that need, which is also why I say there will never be purely unmanned aircraft in combat. Yes, you can have the pilot in the loop, but once you get to a certain point, aircraft are going to be right next to each other, and you can't shoot people down remote control in turn in an engagement.
We just found that out this week. Or just
Right, yeah. Somebody ran into, you know, Russians ran into something out there.
Yeah.
Big sky, little plane theory never works out, right?
Yeah.
You always got to know. But yeah, I think, in my opinion, it's hard. Maybe I'm just an old dinosaur, but it's hard to imagine a world where two pilots aren't going to meet and go to emerge and start turning against each other at some point, because technology, as great as it is, can always be defeated some way, and somebody's always going to figure it out. We've been proved that as a country many times, right? Vietnam itself was, you can't out technology everybody.
So Richie, his last tour in Afghanistan, had called in an airstrike, which one of many, I guess. Came back home after his deployment, and through whatever email system the military has, it's internal, just like mine with where I work is. He got this email and says, "Is this call sign so-and-so?" And he said, "Who are you and how did you get this?" And he said, "This is call sign so-and-so. I was the pilot on an airstrike you called in Afghanistan on this date." And he said, "I would like for you to come to San Antonio." That wing was based out of San Antonio. Right. So I'd like for you to come in San Antonio. Teach us, show us what you're seeing on the ground. We'll show you what we're seeing in the sky, and I'll take you up in my plane.
Right.
Richie said, "I'm in."
Free ride.
Richie went down. He said the bad thing about it was that it was cloudy that day. They flew over Six Flags down there, you know, wherever it was. But he said it was an awesome experience. But when he got ready to leave, and I've seen this, I've seen there's a casing that was spent that he had engraved for Richie, and I thought that was pretty cool. You don't always get to see that pilot and JTAC or CCT interaction, and I thought that was pretty cool. Well, that he would do that.
Even, and that's what makes, you know, Randy and I's friendship unique, is because Naval Aviators and SEALs, although they're the two main trigger pullers in the Navy, they don't interact. They're not based in the same place, right?
Right.
They're on naval bases, we're on air stations, we go on carriers, they're on other ships and other means of transportation. So it's, it's rare to see an aviator and a SEAL to become really good friends. And it's only because we were in Fallon together and we taught the JTAC school together. So yeah, that crossing of the streams does not happen as much as most people think it does. We're not just walking around on base and saying, hey, SEAL, you know, it doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I got, man, it's been awesome. And Chad, if you got any more questions, just let me know. And if there's something you want to talk about that we're missing, man, tell that. We're all about the conversation.
I'm up for anything.
One thing that, a question I've always wondered is, and I got to tell you, watching Maverick, and the old girl says, "What's your call sign?" And the old boy says, "Bob."
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I'm like, so.
If anybody from Hollywood watches this, we want to spin off of
You know that call sign means something, right?
Yeah. So how do you get your call signs? Because you kind of went into it with the other guy earlier. So give us a little, if you can, what you can about how these come about.
Well, in the Navy, we kind of make fun of the Air Force guys and stuff because they typically pick their own call signs and they do the coolest thing you can imagine. They're the Vipers and the ice and the snakes and all that stuff. Navy, that's not how it works. You show up as the new guy in your squadron, and they start writing names on a whiteboard in front of the ready room, and they sit up there for a long time. You do something stupid, it gets put up there until they finally think they have a winner or two up there that we need to vote, and they'll have an all-officer meeting, and we'll sit down, and all the pilots will vote on your call sign, and that's who you are.
And it sticks with you.
It sticks with you, and it's usually not good. It's usually not good. So there's some really creative stuff out there, some that probably can't be repeated on air, but one of my favorites, and I've said this before, I know a guy whose call sign was Lamb Chop, and it's an acronym. It's Little Angry Man Boy Can't Handle Our Program. So, yeah, there's some great ones. It's usually, you know, sometimes you get lucky enough to do something with your last name, so it's not too derogatory because it just fits. Some are just, you know.
Is yours an acronym or is it actually Lucky?
No, mine was in the training command. We didn't have call signs, right? We started getting towards the advanced end of the T-45, which is advanced training. We're about to get our wings. And I'm out on a strike det, so we're out in California where the bombing ranges are. And we were out there for a couple weeks, and me and my roommate had gone to an Indian reservation casino out in San Diego. As you go over the hill into San Diego, the Viejas reservation. And I was not a gambler. Like my roommate thought he was the man. Like he would go out and, you know, he thinks he's card counting, and he doesn't even want me at the table with him to go play blackjack because I'm going to ruin his counting because I'm a rookie. So I go to some other table and I pull, like right off the bat, I pull 3-7 of spades, and it's a pot on the wall, right? I look up and they're like, "You just won a big pot of money," and it was a few $1,000s, and they just handed it to me. And I gave me this tray of chips, and I went over and stood next to him with my big tray of chips, and he was mad. So we got back on that Monday to do a syllabus hop with some instructors. The instructor walked in before the brief where we're putting up our whiteboard, and he said, "If y'all don't put call signs up there, I'm going to put them up there for you." So my roommate jumped up and he wrote Lucky, and it stuck. I was lucky throughout my whole career. I went through some different iterations of that, and at the end I was actually called Big Fighter, which has to do with the Tomcat. The Tomcat is known as the Big Fighter, and I was the only Tomcat guy in my Super Hornet squadron, so they would call me Big Fighter. Plus I probably gained weight at that point, but so Lucky just stuck, and it became kind of a funny thing, like lucky to be alive, lucky to still be married, lucky to still have a job, you know. So they put some derogatory spin on it, but it was because I was gambling and won a pot of money one time, and it just hung with me. And I think it works with Lucky Riley. Everybody thinks it's some Irish thing, but it had nothing to do with it. But yeah, we could talk all day about call signs and some of the funny ones guys got.
My wife asked me a similar question: how do they get their call signs and stuff like that? And I told her it was like it's mostly because you jacked up.
You usually do something stupid.
And it was the same way when I was in football in college.
Yeah.
And she asked me, what would your call sign be today? If you had a call sign, like, I'm an enlisted dude, ain't nobody giving me a call sign. But if I had a call sign, what would it be? I thought about it for a minute, and I was like, Loud loudmouth.
It would be something
It'd
like
be
that,
something idiotic.
yeah. And it's funny you mentioned the wives, because you'll know when a wife met her husband, because if they call him by his call sign, which a lot of wives just, me and my wife met here in Conroe in high school, so I'm Brian. But a lot of wives call their husbands by their call signs, and they met after he'd gotten his call sign. That's, once you have a call sign, that's all you're known by. Nobody, you could probably ask most of the guys I served with in the squadrons what my real name is, and they probably don't know my first name. They just know Lucky. So it's just an interesting side piece. But yeah, you definitely know when a guy has met his wife because what she calls him.
I don't know if I can, if you can talk about this or not. I don't know how to phrase this. We can edit this out if it's, if I'm going somewhere that.
Sure. I'll probably answer.
How, I know we had a lot of air cover, a lot of missions were flown. Were we flying a lot of those from sea?
You mean like in Afghanistan?
Yes.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So were you deployed over there? I mean, is there?
I did too many tours over there. I did at least 3 up to 4. I was overseas flying over Afghanistan and Iraq.
Is there any one mission that you can talk about, or as close to as you can talk about, that came across and says, man, I need to get there quick? Or are you all usually flying, are you already in the air and you're just, you're flying cover, and when somebody needs it, then you go?
Well, the whole OIF thing was fascinating from an aviation history standpoint. It was the most congested airspace you'd ever seen.
Really?
Every country in the world sent people over there. So we would launch off an aircraft carrier way down in the carrier operating areas in the IO, and fly an hour up over Pakistan in there, and then you got Air Force planes coming from Air Force bases, and you got, you name it, Brits, Australians, whatever, they're all in the same airspace and working together as the Allied coalition. And it was impressive how well they controlled that airspace, because there were guys stacked every 1,000 feet no matter where you went in that country. I mean, you're just flying and other planes are crossing in front of you, and you just, most of it was, and specifically that conflict is standby operations. You go out with a specific loadout, and there's complete air superiority. There's no air-to-air threat. So everybody's just carrying air-to-ground weapons, and you're on standby. You have a area responsibility that they're going to send you to. So you check in, you're hitting the tanker. We launch off the aircraft carrier and we pump up right there at the aircraft carrier, fill up our jets. We fly an hour in. The first thing you do is you hit a tanker and you pump up again. Guys have been out there, 7, 8 hours in a little tiny cockpit, depending on how many cycles they leave you over there. And you're on call, basically. It's all on call CAS. You're waiting for JTACs to bring you in, and there's a tick, troops in contact or whatever, and they call you over and you're going to go do your work. The majority of it was reconnaissance. We got our FLIR pods, and we're looking at stuff and trying to help guys on the ground identify things. Sometimes, the majority of it was show of force, just, hey, come in low and disperse this crowd type of thing. The later in my career, that's the majority of what it was. Now, when we first got over there, like I said, I had launched on 9/11 back in the Tomcat, and we went over there right at the beginning. Right, we tore out of there about a month or 2 later, and we were the second carrier over there. The carrier that was already in there was first, and then we were first relief. So that whole Operation Anaconda, if you remember watching CNN and pounding the crud out of the whaleback and that big mountain that they said everybody was in, that was us. We were moving dirt. We were out there closing up cave openings that we could barely see, that guys on the ground say, hit this, and so we did a lot of that. So as far as anything being really hairy for us, with complete air superiority, it wasn't really hairy. I had some moments of, I don't know, call them terror, but like, oh my God, did we just make a mistake type of deal? Or that was a close call type of deal. We had some of that. And I was actually involved in a community famous incident where a bomb had gotten dropped off target. And it was my wingman that did it. And it turns out it was a problem with the airplane. It was a problem with the software in the airplane, because it was a JDAM, and a bomb went where it wasn't supposed to go. which really freaked us out. So that was one where I was like really nervous about what just happened. And we found out later that the aircraft did not buffer the information properly, all this stuff. So it hit a field. It didn't. It might have killed a goat or something, but it was. We were tracking some guys.
Lamb chops having lamb chops.
Yeah, we were tracking some guys that were running out of a town. They ran out into some fields, and we were going to hit them. And we were tracking them through all these trees and stuff. And this bomb went out in a field and probably hurt some farmer's livelihood, I guess. But
so I have two more questions for you. One, I'm sure everybody's wanting to know this, but the first one is, do you pick your wingman, or how are those? How do y'all normally get paired up?
In today's Navy, there's so many, especially like that in combat, crew rest and responsibilities and duties and qualifications. It's just a rotating thing. It's not one guy. Like my dad was flying in Vietnam. He had a wingman they flew with all the time. So today's Navy's not like that.
Not like that.
Not like that. It's pretty much who you're paired with. So you need a guy who's qualified at this to be the lead, and you got to put a wingman with him, and he's probably not going to be as qualified because the other qualified leads are on the next events. But we have so many planes airborne, you can't just pair dudes up. There are some situations where we kind of do that in training. Like I said, I used the term earlier, on wing is kind of our thing to say like, hey, you're a mentor for this guy, and you're going to teach him through a certain part of the syllabus in his training. So we may use it there. But in real world ops, no. And mostly you're taking the most qualified guys. So when day one comes and it's time to go over the beach, it's the A team, for lack of a better word, right? It's all the senior guys are going to go over the beach, and you just mix and match. Where if they really had a wingman, it would be one of the junior guys, and he's probably left behind for the first couple of days of the war until we figure things out anyway. So it doesn't really go like that. It did used to, but not anymore.
So my last aviator, where do you guys go to the bathroom? How many times have you ever been asked that before?
I have been asked that before. The piddle pack. You ever heard of a piddle pack?
Nope.
It's a glorified Ziploc bag that has a bunch of crystals in it. And yeah, you just unzip it right there in the cockpit, and there's a little bag, and you seal it up and put it in your helmet bag to dispose when you get back.
Yeah, I
guess
guess
it gels up into a solid, and yeah, that's it.
Didn't know if it was a catheter type deal or.
Oh God, no. No, I would have probably not been a pilot at that point, but yeah.
But I mean, when you think about it, you just sat here and said, you might be in flight for 7 hours.
Yeah, yeah.
Do y'all carry MREs or something like
We'll
an
carry,
MRE?
probably what you would grab on the way from like a convenience store. Those guys with power bars or stuff like
go to
that. And sometimes you'll grab some fruit or whatever from the wardroom and stuff it in your helmet bag, and that's what you're eating when you're out there for a long time. But most of the time we're flying for an hour and a half, so you're not eating. But when you're doing these, hour in, hour back in combat, yeah, we bring a bunch of stuff to eat, and it's not like fancy MREs or anything. It's just something you can unwrap real quick and grab a snack, and when there's some downtime. But,
so you don't have a Carrig in there. You're like putting your.
I know that's the rumor because we're all prima donnas, but no, we don't have. At least not in our. We make fun of some of the big body guys and talk about their emergency lights, like hot pocket lights, and their microwaves broken, but not for us.
So I don't know if you do. Do you EDC? Do you carry? I mean, do you have your what do you carry?
I'm probably more embarrassed to say it now, but I actually carry the little Smith & Wesson, the little subcompact. It was my wife's. I got it from my wife.
Hey, ain't nothing wrong with that. I carry a Smith & Wesson. It's not a subcompact, but it's a
sub.
Smith & Wesson.
It's I love it. Obviously not going to hit something out at range, but in close type of thing. It's just so much. It's so convenient to carry. That's why I kind of got away from carrying a larger. I used to carry a larger 9 and at one point a 45, but God, you just throw that thing in your pocket. So
I can't. I had, I was telling Randy, I had a Ruger LCP, and it was just so small that when I went to shoot it was breaking my wrist, and I was all over the place. So I'm like, I may as well just throw this thing at somebody.
Yeah, my son's got the new the SIG. I forgot which one it's called. That little tiny 9mm that carries like full 15-round clip in it. And I shot that the other day, a couple months ago. I may have to get me one of those. I have a little bit different mindset than probably Randy and some of the guys. I'm not drawn down. I'm not going to get in a quick draw competition with somebody. Mine's going to be I'm leaving the scene if I can, and if I can't,
That's me.
you know. So
Get me out of here.
I'm not positioned to certain carry. I'm not practicing quick draw all the time. I have, but I'm carrying it to protect my wife and my kids and
That's
get out
me.
of a situation. So if I got to draw down on somebody, hopefully they're with arm's length, and we're going to turn it into something else. So
That's me. I don't. I want to be to the point to where I want to be comfortable. I want to be efficient, but I don't want to be so good to where I'm like, well, I'm gonna, you know,
Right.
I want it to be something I'm thinking about. I want it to have to. It could be life and death, but I really want it to take me a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys out there, I know you're going to think I'm crazy. Just
Yeah, I
don't hit the comments. I mean, whatever you want to. We need them. But yeah, so that's awesome.
yeah, you will get comments on that, by the way. And
Your,
I probably will too.
Your favorite plane
Oh wow.
that you've flown?
That's such a tough question. I've actually been asked that a lot. It's hard to not like your first love. I mean, the Tomcat was. It's just you just strap on 2 rocket engines. It's just a big beast of an airplane. I loved it. The speed is unmatched. However, if I got to go in combat tomorrow, I'm going in the Super Hornet because of the ergonomics and the advanced avionics and all the toys that are associated with it. Because the Tomcat's an old dinosaur, but man, it was fun to fly.
So Rooster was right when he sat down and said, "Man, this thing is old."
It is, and I laughed when he said that in the movie. I was like, I know exactly what he's talking about. That shot of the circuit breakers.
Were you like, "It's right here, man. You should know where this is at."
Actually, yeah.
Question I have is, do you have any thoughts on the F-22s that are out now?
As a mate, I mean, I don't know what I can say outside of unclassified stuff. That's just amazing. It's a new generation. It is the 5th gen. I had a chance to go up against a few, and we would bring them out to Fallon for our war games and stuff like that, and the Air Force would bring some up because they were the only ones that had them at the time. And yeah, I wish I could tell you why.
That's what Richie said. That's all he would say. I asked him, I said,
They're
"Rich,
amazing.
does this 5th gen exist?" He said, "Yes, and it is amazing."
Absolutely.
He said, "Dad, you wouldn't believe."
Performance, avionics, weapon systems, everything is light years.
What to talk off cameras.
Right. It's light years. Like
We'll chat.
I wouldn't have a chance in a
I was
Super Hornet or
stationed on
something.
I was stationed on Langley.
Yeah.
So
They're awesome. I wish I got my hands on one, you know. Everybody talks about you regret certain things, not doing certain things in your career, not going to space, whatever. I'm like, not really. I really would have liked to got my hands on an F-22, but besides that, I kind of got to do everything I wanted to do, so.
So now a lot of people don't realize this. I know that on board the Shasta, the Hermitage, other places I was, and I think it's maybe true with aircraft carriers. When the ship goes to port, you're not there. You guys fly off into some area.
Sometimes.
So with that, and the only reason I'm saying that is, it goes into my next question. So what would be your favorite port of call through the Navy, or what, your favorite country that you?
Israel,
Israel.
hands down.
Spent
Loved
3
it.
weeks in Haifa.
Yeah, Haifa. We went. I'd gone in there in my first Tomcat tour. We knew we had 2 detachments coming up that were going to be dogfight detachments. One crew was going to get to go fight the West Germans in the MiG-29, and another group was going to go fight the Israelis, F-15s, F-16s. Everybody signed up to go fight the MiG-29s, and I was bummed. I was happy that I got picked. As I was a junior guy, I got picked to go do the Israel thing, but I was really bummed I didn't get to go fight MiG-29s. Well, they wound up canceling that, so those guys never even got to go. So we were the only ones that got to go, and we did the Israelis for, I think we got off the ship for 2 weeks, and we were in Nevatim at their Air Force base out there. Amazing. I had the greatest time in those 2 weeks fighting those pilots, and it was just pure dog fighting, which is just the coolest thing ever. And it literally just light the burners, catch the guy in front of you off the runway, start fighting, fight till you're out of gas, and drop in. It was just, you're dripping with sweat. It was fantastic. So I had a great time in Israel, and then we went out to the ship, and then the ship pulled into Haifa, so we were there another couple weeks, and got to do Jerusalem and the Dead Sea and Masada, and I love that country. They love us. The Western influences are really cool. So I've done both Westpac and Med cruises, and I've been to a bunch of different ports, but Israel, hands down, was a blast for me. And this is all pre-9/11 too, by the way. That deployment was pre-9/11, so it was a little different feel at that time.
Yeah,
But yeah, I
definitely.
enjoyed that quite a bit.
Hunting or fishing?
Fishing.
Fishing rods. Who would've-
It should be obvious, but yeah.
I asked you what your toughest phase of your training was.
Mm-hmm.
What was your favorite phase?
Dogfighting, ACM. I was raised to be a fighter guy. You know, there's VF, if for people who don't know, the V stands for fixed wing, so fixed wing fighter. So I was in VF 11, the Tomcat was a fighter. And then you go to Hornets and it's VFA, fighter attack. And as a fighter guy, I was always like, I don't want to drop bombs in the mud and all this kind of stuff. A lot of guys, you know, the Marines, they get real hoorah about supporting the guys on the ground. And I'm a prima donna. I like the one-on-one, I like the turning, and just one guy comes out and one guy doesn't. So I loved dogfighting.
One of my favorite quotes from Maverick is, Mav, why are the wings coming out, Mav?
It's, yeah.
The taxiway, a very short taxiway.
Yeah, it's there's some
Almost
funny lines in that movie, specifically towards the Tomcat guy that I'm pretty sure only Tomcat guys got, but they were funny, and some of that stuff goes into that. So I enjoyed some of that dialogue.
That's one of the few movies that I felt like the sequel was as good or better than the first.
Yeah.
I thought that was very well done. And
I
I'm
was
glad they
actually,
did it.
the first few times I've been asked, and I was actually asked on different podcasts about this, I was pretty hard on the movie. When I first saw it, I think
Really?
I went into it with the wrong attitude. I was like, I really don't want to see this movie. My wife drugged me to the movie. There's too much to pick apart. But now that I think about it, and I've seen some of the stuff the Tomcat guys that I know were involved in it did, and they did have really good advising on the movie. So the scenario, far-fetched as it is, was entertaining.
It's entertainment. That's
It's
what I mean,
entertainment,
yeah.
and the flying scenes are incredible. Some of the footage they got are just eye-watering. Some things I'd never seen.
So
Like,
there's a bunch of Air Force guys, so the way they shot that is they would have almost every plane that they shot in was a two-seater. They almost didn't use any one-seaters, even though they say that they did. And that's because they had the guy in who's actually the stick jockey was an actual Air Force pilot, and so they would have the camera shooting the back of his helmet.
Yep.
So that's an actual dude flying the plane.
yep,
And then they would have another camera mounted and shooting back at the passenger, and they would have to be acting in real time with these guys flying. So it's real.
it's neat. It's neat.
real jets, real G's,
Yeah.
the whole nine.
And they got some pretty cool maneuvers that most aviators that see it go, wow. I mean, like the Cobra maneuver that guy does is impressive. You know, there's a shot of the.
So that's not CG.
No. I don't think any of it was CG. I have to go back and watch the movie, but I think it's all real footage. And there's a shot of the 3 Super Hornets coming low around the bend in the river, and they're all vaping, a little shockwave coming off of them. That's one of the coolest shots I've ever seen.
Oh, that's
That's
gorgeous.
really neat. That's really neat. And I come from a community in Tomcat where the guy in the back was always carrying a camera. We got some cool shots. I got tons of cool footage of in-cockpit stuff, but they got some really good ones. They got some good ones.
That's I'm glad to hear that because I thought it did. I like when movies portray our men and women in our military and our armed forces in a positive way.
Positive light. Yeah, I agree.
That hey, this is an amazing thing they're doing.
I agree.
It's when it gets so outlandish, so unreal. To me, that's a slap in the face to our men and women.
And Randy and I talk about it a lot when we have the discussion about our preparation in the book and stuff like that. And one thing I always bring up is Hollywood never gets it right. They never get right 2 things. They never get the camaraderie interaction. Even in the movies Top Gun, it's not quite right. It's
Right.
a little corny. It's a little cheesy. It's not how we really talk to each other. It's a lot more degrading, as you know. It's a lot tougher. I
America-
could point to some other TV shows that do it in different communities, which is actually better. But they never get the military ones right. And the other thing they don't get right is the absolute panic in a Hollywood movie of guys getting shot at or somebody getting killed, and everybody just freaks out on the radio. They're screaming. I'm like, it's not like that. And they, for the most part, except for some dramatization, the comms and everything are pretty good in that movie. So they had a lot of, they have Navy support to make that movie. They have real technical advisors. So for the most part, it's done really well.
That's like the story of where Jason Redman, was shot in the face.
Yep.
And I think Eddie Penny may have been there with him when that. No, was it Shipley's son? Don
think it
Shipley's
might have been
son was
Shipley's
with
son.
him when that. And they called in the airstrike, and I mean they had to call danger close. I mean that was they said the pilot didn't want to do it because he said, "I'm gonna kill you guys." He said, if you don't do it, we're dying anyway. And it was successful. And to me, when you hear stories like that, that is such a compliment to what our men and women can do. And I was blown away. It's awesome to sit here and talk to you. I mean,
Appreciate it.
I'm honored.
It's fun.
I really am. And and even with Randy, I watched those guys. I mean, I was deployed with them. I knew what they were capable of, and even I, whenever I watch movies or this show, they've got out SEAL Team 6 or whatever, or SEAL Team, and I watch that and I'm like, guys, just stop.
Yeah, it's not right.
Just stop.
Yeah.
I know it's Hollywood. I know it's they're just stop. I mean, you're doing such a discredit not only to yourself.
Well, you know what it is? You know what it is they make things so fantastical to look good on film when what they actually do is just as fantastic. And they kind of try to dramatize something they don't need to dramatize. And that's what kind of gets me. It's like, but this is the way it really went down, and that's just as cool.
Yeah.
But they'll still put their little Hollywood twist on it, which we can go soapbox on that if you want. But I don't.
The only way we can win a war this day and time is to not allow any cameras on the battlefield. That's the
I think we'd
worst
have a
thing
good
that ever
conversation
happened.
about that. Yeah.
You can't do it. I mean, war is not. Hollywood glorifies it. It's anything but. Man, some of the books that I've read,
Yeah.
I can only imagine some of the things that you've seen. And
Yeah.
so here, I'll ask you this. So if you, same thing I asked Randy when you were sitting here, if you could go anywhere in the world to observe a sunset with your wife, where would it be?
I thought about that when you said it, and I hate to be boring, but I'd say Hawaii. I really
No,
would.
that's fine. I've
Yeah.
had people say my backyard, my porch.
I just, me and her, that definitely would be the place to be. Like I said, I probably have some real slanted views about a lot of places I've been in the world, both good and bad. I always see both where I go, and I'm always at peace there. I love being there, and I think she's the same way. So Hawaii.
I miss Hawaii on my west back. I miss Hawaii and Taiwan. I picked it up in Guam. I spent 3.5, almost 4 months, or almost 4 weeks in rec stay at Subic Bay. They flew me back to Guam, picked up the chassis in Guam. 2 days later, I'm sitting right back in Subic Bay where they just flew me from. I'm like, what's the?
Not cool.
Yeah, it's not cool. So real quick, I didn't ask you this. So, how many kids?
I have 4. I have 4 boys.
God bless your wife, bro. God bless you.
Yeah.
How old?
I've got one right now who is 21. He's in the Navy. And
Aviator or just?
we'll just say he's in the Navy.
Okay.
And then my youngest, matter of fact, his birthday's coming up, and he's a little guy. He's 8. I want to get that wrong. So I've got quite a
Dad,
I've got
you
quite a
don't know.
range. So yeah, 8 all the way up to 21. So my oldest was born. His due date was September 10th, 2011, and he was born right after all that went down. So that was my first one.
So I will say this to your wife. Thank you for your service.
Yeah, yeah. She
And
went through it.
that's-
She went through it all.
I'm going to tell you, the hardest job in the military is a military spouse.
Agreed.
That is the toughest. We go off for our 6 months. They're left to, and this is the thing people don't realize. In Virginia Beach, when a hurricane hits the beach, everybody that's on board a ship is headed to sea and leaving their wife and kids to fend for themselves on, to take care of everything, make sure they're safe. I mean,
I had a specific incident of a hurricane coming, and we had to evac the airplanes. So I had said, see ya, I got to go get an airplane, and we actually flew all the way down to San Antonio we got them way out of there, and she was with the
Yeah,
boys,
yeah, I
two
had to
young
leave that,
kids, and heading over the mountain by herself. So, yeah, people don't see that part of it.
They don't see that part. It's amazing. Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
was
And I'm
fun.
looking forward to getting you and Randy together and going over some of these other things that are that are in the book that I want to get into.
I enjoy it.
Thank y'all for joining Fortitude. Please hit that like button, leave a comment to help us trigger the algorithms. Thanks again, Chad, for coming down and doing this. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to reset everything around another table, and we're going to sit down and have a conversation with Lucky and Randy both about Unwavered. See you guys in the next one.